Hi, I'm Laura.
And I'm Fireese.
And what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about how to communicate with your teenager.
How to communicate with this monster. No, I'm kidding. You're not a monster. So before we dive into it, we'll teach you the sign for communicate. So you take your two letter C's for communicate and you just move them back and forth. Or...
because communication is a back and forth.
That's right. Good one. That's exactly it. Communication is a back and forth. Or I've also seen it done like this. Good. So I will preface this video by saying what we're going to share with you might work for you or it might not. So you can take it or leave it, but we wanted to share in case some of you are having difficulty communicating with your teenager. And if you have a teenager who's very anxious and has a problem talking to you, some of these tips might help you. If you are listening and you're like, I would never do that with my kid, forget it, then carry on. We just wanted to share our experience. So with that said, why is it so hard for teens to communicate with parents, Fireese?
Well, I think it's kind of two things. I think number one is it's a time in a teenager's life, or a time in a person's life, when you're feeling very self-conscious, very anxious, very isolated, very misunderstood. So being able to communicate with somebody who you feel doesn't understand you, or you feel is against you, or is angry at you, or whatever it may be, can be really anxiety-inducing.
That makes sense. I mean, I remember being a teenager and I felt the exact same way you did, and I didn't communicate with my mom, and I felt all of the things that you're describing. And I think sometimes as adults, we forget what that feeling feels like. And you have to understand too that the teenage brain is still growing and still changing. And it's because of that growth that they have trouble with regulating their emotions, which means everything feels really big and difficult. And so that includes communication.
Yeah. You may have heard a lot of people talk about how, like, your brain isn't developed until you're 25. And specifically, the part of your brain that isn't developed is the prefrontal cortex. And that has to do with scheduling and planning, and also decision making and reasoning. So that leads to sometimes poor decision making, risky behavior, but also your idea of time and the future is slightly altered. So a lot of teens' emotions feel like they're happening right now, and they're never gonna stop happening. Like, we don't have the ability to think into the future as much. And so whereas an adult may think, I'm upset right now, however, I'm not going to be in 24 hours. This isn't gonna matter in 2 weeks. However, a teenager, when something bad happens, this is their whole life. Their whole life is ending. They're never going to feel better again. They're never going to feel okay. This is never going to end. You're never going to stop being mad at them, whatever.
I just remember I remember, like, as you're talking, my stomach just got all in knots because as you're saying that, I just had wicked flashbacks of feeling like that as a teenager, just where the world is going to end. You're never going to recover. Things are really difficult. And a lot of teenagers nowadays experience anxiety. Fireese experiences a lot of anxiety. And at one point, and even still sometimes, we had a lot of trouble connecting and communicating, which was really hard for me as her parent because I was used to her always wanting to be with me and just communication being really easy. And then all of a sudden, it got really hard and she kind of shut down and stopped communicating. There was a lot of fighting because I didn't understand why things had changed, and even probably she didn't understand and really know what she needed or wanted. So it was through some trial and error process that we got to strategies that work for us. So one of the strategies is what? Do you want to share?
So one of the strategies is communicating via like email or text or like written message if you're pulling it retro. But being able to communicate in a way that's not face-to-face, I think is really helpful for a lot of people.
I think that's a big one for teenagers.
it can be very stressful to sit down and have that confrontation. I know, especially I'm one of those people who really hates confrontation. Like, it's like
she just shuts down.
I just can't. Like I just shut down.
She won't look at you. She won't talk to you. She just freezes.
Yeah, and so being able to have that line of communication where I don't feel like a deer in headlights is really good. It also helps me compile all my thoughts and all my feelings and be able to think about it, because when you're in an argument, when you're listening to the other person, you're not really truly listening sometimes. You're thinking of what to say to rebut them. So I think it's really important to be able to sit down and think about your thoughts and think about what you're going to say. And also make sure that you don't clam up in the moment and not say what you want to say.
That's a really important point, I think, for people to understand, is that when you get into an argument with somebody, you're not sitting there listening to them and all of the points that they're making. You're in your mind formulating a response to the thing that they had said, even though they're continuing talking. So you're listening using your defensive ear and your rebuttal ear, versus when you get an email, it takes sort of some of the emotion out of it, because I know I'm super sensitive. I'm a super feeler. Fireese is a super feeler. And when you have two people who are very similar, fighting can happen and lack of communication can break down. And so when she sends me an email, I can read it without sort of getting defensive. Well, no, I still get defensive, but without reacting right away. And then it gives me time I can reread it a few times. I don't have to respond right away.
Yeah, because sometimes I think I'm guilty of this all the time, is you read something in a certain tone because you expect it to be negative. Mm-hmm. But going back and reading it a second or a third time, you're able to kind of step back and kind of understand what that person is saying.
Yeah. And your initial reaction might be hurt. I remember one time Fireese sent me an email that was just crushing to me. And I didn't want to respond right away, because I really wanted to sit and think about where she was coming from and why she was feeling the way that she was feeling. And so what I did is I emailed her back and said, thank you for emailing me. I will respond. I just need some time, so that she knows, okay, I got this. I'm thinking about it and I'll get back to you. And then it took me days to respond back. And that, I guess, is the beauty of emails, that I could really sit and compose a thoughtful email back to her. And it's more of a detailed sort of conversation that we're having versus an argument in person. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've agreed upon is that we don't talk about what our issues are in the email. I know you might...
One rule about Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club.
It's so true. So we don't, when that was going on, it was very hurtful and she was very stressed, and it was really but when we were together and we were sort of normal and which made family and home life fairly normal. So, I think that's very helpful. And I know that as a parent, you might be thinking, well, no, I want my child to be able to communicate to me. I want them to be able to talk to me. Yes, 100%. I'm with you. I wish that she would just come and sit on my bed and be like, hey, Mom, this is what's going on. But the reality is she can't. Right now, she can't. She will eventually be able to do that. It's sort of like when you have a toddler. You don't expect that toddler to behave like an adult, because they're not old enough yet to react to certain things in an adult manner. And so you have to teach them. And we sort of have this understanding that toddlers are going to be a certain way, but we forget that teenagers are almost going through their secondary toddler phase because of all of the hormones and the growth but almost worse, because now they're going off into the world and they're experiencing things that are outside of your control, and it's even more chaotic. So I think we have to be really tender to teenagers and figure out a way that we can communicate with them that is comfortable for them, which means that they will then communicate to us.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
Because if you don't try and meet your child halfway in what they're trying to communicate to you, then they're just not going to communicate to you. You could just say, you're going to talk to me and I'm not going to email with you and whatever, but that's not really helping you, because then your kid is just not going to talk to you. And I think I personally would rather, if I had a kid, that my kid talk to me and just be able to meet them halfway. Another really important thing I think about emails is it helps you, as we were talking about earlier, as the parent to respond. And I think that really helps, or leads into an important point, which is the way your child communicates with you, or if they communicate with you, or how much they communicate with you, is to do with your reaction when they do communicate with you. So if your child tells you something and you don't like it, you don't have to be okay with that. You don't have to like it. You don't have to be happy about it. But if you yell at them or scream at them or whatever and get angry and defensive or just anything like that, then they're going to learn that they can't trust you with information. They can't trust you with telling them things. They can't trust you with trusting them. So being able to think about your response and be able to have that is very important.
The other thing that I learned, which we have been in therapy over the several years, not constantly, but on and off, just to help us through certain blips that we might have. And we have blips. We're not perfect, and we don't have an ideal relationship. I think we have a good relationship, but like anything, ebbs and flows. So the one thing that we learned is the importance of validation your child's feelings.
Validation will change your life when it comes to communicating with your teenager. I promise you.
It really does.
Because we feel that there's this gap between us, like your teenager probably feels so disconnected from you, and like unless you have some really great relationship which if you do, kudos, but I think most people feel that not super connected to their parents and not super close or whatever. So being able to validate and show that you understand why they're feeling certain ways can be really helpful, because I mean, you've heard of the cliche, like, you don't understand me, you don't know me, like that kind of thing. You kind of gotta use those validation skills to...
Yeah, so for example, like if your child does something that you disagree with and you ground them. So let's say your child goes out and you say, text me when you get to your friend's house, and then they don't text you. And then you ground them when they get home, and they're going to be mad, they're going to be upset. And so you can say, I understand this must be very upsetting for you. You must be very frustrated right now that this is happening. And the fact that you're not going to see your friends for a week is probably really disappointing to you. So you're validating. You're saying, this really sucks. I get that it sucks. I understand that it sucks. And the punishment is still the punishment. So you don't want to say, but, you did this, but, or you have to understand that this is the way that it is and the rules are the rules. Yes, the rules are the rules, and that's why she's being punished, but it doesn't take away her need to know that you understand that she's probably feeling really awful right now. And so what we learned is to try and do 3 validations. So it seemed really awkward and really weird at first, but it's like, yeah, honey, this feels awful. And you're probably very mad at us right now. And I understand that, because you're probably mad at yourself for not just easily texting. And, you're going to be upset, and the punishment still stands. So you still have to be the parent, but then you have to, it's all about them feeling
understood.
Yeah, feeling understood. It really does make a world of difference when it comes to communicating. So another thing Fireese had mentioned is the writing down. So if your child doesn't have an email, or you don't typically use computers with your family, you can get a journal. So what we had at one point was a book that we would write in, and it would just be hidden somewhere in the house that only the 2 of us knew about. And she would write or compose her thoughts, and then she would say to me, can you look in the book? And then I would look in the book and I would respond that way. We would never talk about it. I would never go into her room and say, okay, I read your thing, let's talk now, because she would just deer in a headlights. She would freeze up, she wouldn't talk. It made her really uncomfortable. And so that's another way that you can do it. Texting, we text often. She will text me, and my first reaction is to just go downstairs and respond to her, because it's easiest for me. But I have respected the fact that she needs me to respond to her in a text, even though she's right downstairs. which leads me into our next progression of getting her to communicate in an adult way, because, you know, a lot of parents might think, well, I just want them to talk to me. I just want her to talk to me. It's like, yes, but she needs to be able to learn how to be comfortable doing that. And so now we communicate via Zoom in
or
another room.
on the phone or FaceTime or anything like
FaceTime,
that.
we've done FaceTime, yeah. So basically, it takes that element of being in the same room and that feeling of whatever, but maybe explain why this works for you.
I think it feels like you're not as trapped in the situation. Like, at any time, I can turn my camera off. I can leave the call and be in a room by myself. Not that it would be very productive to leave the call, but it is an option. Like, I'm not stuck in a room or stuck in a car or whatever.
So it gives you the control.
Yeah, so it gives me the control in this situation. It also gives me a little bit of distance, like having it. It's like I'm not looking at you in the face. I'm looking at my screen. I'm looking at whatever. And it kind of gives that little bit of distance that I need to not completely shut down. Because I think face-to-face interaction, I don't know if it's just me as like a pretty anxious person or someone who really hates confrontation, but I find face-to-face interaction really difficult a lot of the time.
I think a lot of teenagers probably feel that way.
So being able to have that kind of level of disconnect where it doesn't feel as like head on is a little bit comforting.
Yeah, and as she said, it gives her the option to not hang up. She luckily hasn't hung up on me yet, but you know, there was time when we were on and she just got so overwhelmed and she shut her camera off. So she was still there and we could still talk, but we couldn't see each other. And that was what she needed at the time. And then she turned her camera back on when she was ready and we sort of continued that conversation. So these are just baby steps that I think are getting to the point where she's eventually going to be able to talk to me. And, you know, it's just all about teaching her how to do it and giving her a safe place and listening to her needs. Like, what does she need? This is what she needs right now. And so if she's going to communicate to me this way, then it's better than her not communicating to me. I think you had said to me before about some people do it behind doors.
Yeah, like I've heard that some people will, like one person sits on one side of the door and one person sits on the other side of the door, and you kind of have the conversation that way. I've heard someone talk about that who's kind of older, so they might have been around before Zoom was a thing. But yeah, again, another option if you're not super technology friendly or savvy or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just sitting on one side of the door, the other person sits on the other side of the door, and you just have a conversation. You don't have to make that eye contact, because I find eye contact is the worst.
Yeah, she doesn't do well with that. So, well, anyways, I think those are the tips that we have, is just basically emailing or writing in a journal, texting, and then trying video or sitting on another side of the door. Basically, you can ask your child what they need. So not when you're at the height of an issue, just when you're out for a walk or out for a drive, like just say, you know, I want to be able to communicate with you better. What feels good to you? Like, what would help you communicate to me? Basically, you just want to keep those lines of communication open, because teenagers need to be able to feel like they have a person that they can always go to, and you want that person to be you. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for talking, Reese.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
No problem.
So should we review the signs?
Yeah.
Okay. The sign is communicate. So your C's back and forth, because
Communication is a back and forth.
exactly, and communicate. And that's it. So if you have anything that you would like us to discuss as a parent and teenager, leave them in the comment section. We're happy to have a chat, probably, depending on the topic and how comfortable Fireese is at the time. She will communicate her wishes to me. And if you have any tips, feel free to also leave those in the comment section, because it's always great to just share parenting advice and help.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching.
Yep. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.